Welcome to SAP BTP or SAP Cloud Platform Application Development course. Now let's begin this course. The first thing which we are going to talk about are a basic background of cloud services, what is PaaS and what are the different service model for cloud services and where SAP BTP stands in. So in this level 1, we will learn all these terminologies and get an understanding of what we are dealing with. If you are already acquainted with different cloud services and model of the cloud services, then you can skip the level 1 part. But I will highly recommend to continue the level 1 as well, even if you have a good understanding of cloud service models. So let's begin the level 1 by understanding first what is cloud computing. Now, when we talk about cloud computing, we are basically referring to renting resource. Now, when we rent a resource, why we need to rent a resource and what is the resource here? Now, for example, you have a company here which requires certain softwares. Now, these softwares can either be hosted on their own machines, which they purchase, and they basically set up their software. Now, it can also happen that the initial investment is too large and they don't want to really do the investment of purchasing the hardware or purchasing the software. They take on rent certain machines from Amazon Web Service, AWS for short. They do some renting of some database, and the database systems comes with the cost of the hardware. So you have the hardware cost and also the cost of the software. It can happen that they are running certain open source software like Postgres or MySQL, or might be having a licensed version of Oracle. So it can happen that the software can be paid or can be free. So the database and the software are rented, and they also get some server, and this is the server where their software is actually running. And using this database, they have some applications which they need to be used. So this company ABC wants this application, and they are basically not willing to purchase everything initially. They take the rented softwares and hardware from AWS, and they're able to set all the system with this particular setup, and they are using or utilizing within their own company, and this gets the job done. Now, in the first case here, when you are basically buying everything before you actually start, you basically buy all the hardware and you buy all the software. Sometimes the softwares are free, open source, and you do certain custom development, and you have to set everything up here. Then the time it takes and the initial investment is very high. And in this case, when you are setting up the entire system with cloud platforms, you can basically take the entire software from the AWS. For example, AWS is offering a software, and what you do, you just use this software. You don't have to pay any initial investment for the hardware or any initial investment in the software. You directly use the software, and based on how many users are using this software, you are just paying to AWS the amount. So the initial investment is less here, and in the case of your on-premise, the initial investment is more. Now, over time, if you are using the software, imagine for 10 years, and in this case of on-premise, you have everything under your control. You are the owner of this setup, and you are using this also for 10 years. So we are basically talking using the setup for an extended period of time. So if you are using the setup, then comparatively, the amount you spend in your cloud or rented resource will be higher than the amount you will be spending if you are taking all the system on premise or under your own control. So that is one thing which you can note. This is also advantage and the disadvantage you can count of a cloud computing. Now, this is a broad level scenario, and what we actually got from this simple use case, we may have different type or different resources which we might take from AWS. For example, we talked about that we can either rent a software and pay to AWS based on number of user, or we can rent the hardwares, the server itself. And we can also take certain software which are embedded in the hardware. So there are different types of renting which we can do. So based on this type, we have divided the cloud offering into different service model. For example, in the first case here, we are just paying AWS for the software, and we are basically renting the software. And as we just discussed, we are paying AWS based on how many users are using the software. I can have 100 users using the software, or I can have 10,000 users using the software. So one of the very simple example is your Slack chat or Zoom meeting. So based on number of users which are using the software, you pay to the particular vendor. And that is the first category. Now, one more thing which can happen is you're basically renting the hardware here. So that is the third case here. We're directly renting certain infrastructure. For example, I don't want to spend a lot of money to buy expensive hardware with 64 GB of RAM and 10 TB of the hard disk and special 8-core CPU. So they are special hardwares which will require a lot of money and investment from my IT landscape side. So I don't want to spend so much money on buying the equipment. I can just rent the hardware, and using that hardware, I can put my own software solution on that hardware, and I can run on top of AWS hardware my setup or my system. So that is the third category which can come. Now, one more thing you might be also wondering, what is this paying the hardware and the software infrastructure? Now, when the vendor, which is from where we are renting, if they rent us certain hardwares, and here we are not talking about one single machine, but we are talking about n number of machine, and they provide us n number of machine, and they also provide us a software which is capable of managing those n number of machine. So for example, what they are basically renting me in this second case, they are renting me a hardware, and they are renting me a software which has the capability to manage all the hardware resources. And this is not just a single operating system, but an operating system for the entire infrastructure. So if they can provide me a software which can do that, then that comes in a different category. Now, if they do that, then what they basically are providing me, they are providing me this infrastructure or this hardware infrastructure. And on top of that, they are basically providing me a layer of software which can effectively manage those hardware. I don't have to really bother about how to get optimum output out of this hardware, because what can happen here is that if I just take the hardware, then what are the software which I can put on top of it? Because normally you will not buy a single machine. If you are a big large company, it is generally a bunch of machines which you are buying to set up your entire infrastructure. Now it can happen that you are buying a bulk of this machine and you have your own IT team which basically put software, configures those entire machines. So here this is kind of a hyperscaler which has a lot of systems where you can put databases, and you have this entire infrastructure which you can self-manage. And on the opposite spectrum here, you are directly taking the software. You are not bothered even about how the server is handling capabilities or functionalities. You are just taking features. So you are just taking features of the software which you can directly use out of the box. So here out of the box, you are basically taking the software. But in this middle ground here, you are taking hardware and you are also taking a layer of software which can manage not only single machine or two machine, but the entire stack of your hardware. So it can be multiple servers, multiple databases. So all that one single operating system can manage. And you are basically saying this entire hardware stack and this entire operating system I want to rent, and you as a vendor take care of it. And I don't want to really bother how you do it internally. I just want the common operating system which I can interact with. And in the case here, you are saying, I don't want to understand how you do the setup of all my requirement of this hardwares, but you provide me this. And in the first case here, when you are just taking the software, you are saying, I don't care how you run internally, but I just need these features. And if you have the software, I will pay you based on number of user or maybe a monthly subscription. So these are three broad categories on which a user, which is basically a company or a business, or can be an individual which is having a requirement, or which can be a company or a corporation, or can be an individual user, is taking resources from a vendor. Here in this case, we are talking about AWS. Now, this is a general overview of different renting categories. And the first category, what we just told you, where we just take the software, is called your software as a service, also known for SaaS. And the second category, where we are taking the hardware and also taking the software to manage all the hardwares, and also taking the software which have the capability to manage the entire hardware or bunch of hardware infrastructure resource, that is called PaaS, also known as platform as a service. And here in the third case, where we are saying we are just renting the hardware resource, so we are coining the term as infrastructure as a service, also short for IaaS. So here in the IaaS, you are just taking the infrastructure and renting it. So that is the entire summary. Now, if you want to see an analogy to this in your real life, then we can also take an example of a traveler. For example, here there is a traveler which comes into a new city. So this is the new city, and the traveler has come to explore the new city, visit new places. Now, the problem which this traveler faces is where he can stay. So he can either choose to stay in a hotel, or he can take a fully furnished apartment, or he can take a non-furnished apartment. Now, when he's going to stay in hotel, what he's going to get? He's going to get one single room, and based on per night spent. So based on the number of night which is spent, he will pay the hotel the bill. And when he is going to take the fully furnished apartment, he's going to get an entire apartment, and this entire apartment he might be charged for the entire month. For 1 month, how much is the rent? That much he need to pay. If he's taking a non-furnished apartment, he need to also pay the entire month. Now, in case of the service apartment, inside the service apartment, he's going to get all the equipment. He's going to get bed, he's going to get also gas and few utensils, and also tables, televisions, and other equipments, maybe a coffee makers, and number of other furnitures which he can utilize till the stay. Now, in case of non-furnished apartment, he's just going to get an apartment. There is nothing there. If he needs table, chair, or bed, or stove to cook food, then he need to purchase everything within that particular house. So he need to basically pay everything and put it in the house if he need to use it. So these are the three cases. Now, in the first case, the expense might be more if he's going to stay for a longer time, and the expense will be less here if he's going to stay for more time, because if he's going to stay for 10 years, so it's kind of a very long time for a traveler. But just kind of imagine if he's going to stay for the 10 year, then staying in a non-furnished apartment will be much better, because he can build the entire room based on his need. Now here in the fully furnished apartment, he's still going to pay less compared to amount he's going to pay if this is a good and decent hotel. He also out of the box get utensils where he can cook the food he wants. And here he has to order food, and ordering food on a daily basis will be much more costly compared to cooking food here in this fully furnished apartments. So I'm not going to go in the details here because this is going to become an economics course compared to a technical course of cloud services. So I hope that you got the point what we are talking about when we are talking about a platform as a service. We are not only getting the infrastructure, which is the hotel, but we are also getting basic amenities with it, which are essential if you want to survive or live in that particular infrastructure. And here in non-furnished apartment, we are just getting the basic infrastructure, and everything else are something which are managed or should be managed by us. And that is what infrastructure as a service is. And in this PaaS, we basically get this operating system layer, and this operating system layer is basically managing the entire hardware resources and are able to get the optimum performance or optimum work out of those infrastructure. So for example, if you have multiple application to be deployed or to be put in the cloud, then this software component which is provided by the vendor, you can use that. You can put directly your software solution which is custom made to this particular operating system, and this OS can manage internally where it can internally host those solution, and you don't have to bother about how individually machines are utilized. And this entire OS which is handling the hardware and the hardware itself are basically managed by the vendor. In this case, we are talking about AWS, so AWS is managing it, or if you're talking about Google, then Google is managing it. And the SaaS is where the entire stack is managed by the vendor. You are just using the software as it is provided out of the box. You are just paying for number of users or maybe monthly basis. So based on different scenarios, you are paying for the solution. And a good example, what we told just is a hotel. You are just paying the hotel based on the night stayed. And if you are ordering food or using any other service, then you are also charged based on that service used, or how much you are basically requiring that service, or how much time you are basically requiring that service for. So different service model exist for pricing, but I'm just talking here a generic terms. Now, I hope that this simple real life correlation might help you to get a better understanding of the difference between your SaaS solution versus your PaaS solution, and your PaaS solution versus your infrastructure as a service solution, because our focus here is on the PaaS solution. Now, when we talk about SAP BTP, then SAP BTP will be considered as a platform as a service or a PaaS model based cloud providing, or a PaaS model of cloud service offering. And inside SAP BTP, we will be broadly having two things. One is the services which are provided by SAP, and the second is a software which manages the environment to host, run, and manage applications for new enhancement. And the software by using which this environment is created are the Cloud Foundry and Kyma. Now, Cloud Foundry and Kyma, they are both open source software by using which you create a layer of platform which manages multiple hardware resources. So you have this multiple hardware resource, and they are managed by this operating system. And this operating system is what we have as your Cloud Foundry and your Kyma. And as a user, when you go and use this operating system and the hardware, you basically tell the operating system that, hey operating system, I have my application, and can you host and manage this application for me? And you just throw the application to the operating system, and the operating system basically takes care of the application according to the application. If it is a Node application or a Java application or a application written in Go, so based on that, the operating system will create a small container and basically host your application there. So the application code will get hosted there, and it basically manages the scale of it. If you need to increase the number of server, you can easily tell the OS that, okay, I need this application to be used by more user. Can you increase the number of servers which are hosting the application? So you can both do horizontal scaling and vertical scaling. So the horizontal scaling is when you are increasing the number of machines. So for example, if previously we were having one machine running the application, now you have 2 or 3 or 10 machines running the application. And vertical scaling is where you increase the memory of it. For example, previously my server was having it 4 GB RAM. Now I increase it to 16 GB RAM. So it will be much faster. So that is the two type of scaling which this OS can easily do without stopping the application. And also you can provide security to the application by controlling who can access the application and who cannot access the application. And there are a number of other requirements which the user will have when they are basically creating this application. Now this application is a custom application which is made by this user. Now it can happen that the user want to also use some of the existing SAP services. So these services are also offered by SAP. What they have to do is they have to just create an instance of the service and they can use and make the application talk to the service. So that is also possible. So some of the popular services are SAP Workflow, BRF, Mobile Cloud Service, SAP BaaS for DevOps and development. And there are a number of other services like the security and connectivity service. So a lot of SAP services are offered within SAP BTP, and if you want to use those services, you have to create instance of the service and use it in your application. And many a times it can happen that you don't need a custom application to make use of this service. As a user, you can directly use the SAP Workflow service and can utilize and take advantage of the automation by the workflow. Now, similar to workflow, there are a lot of other service in the catalog which we have not mentioned here. The UAA service for user authorization and authentication. Now you also have the connectivity service for cloud connectors. So a lot of other services are also part of the SAP service catalogs. And many of you will be experiencing some of the services. And we will be also exploring some of the services throughout this course journey when we dig into the hands-on parts as well. Now, I hope that you got a basic understanding of what we are dealing with. And just to end this section, we'll summarize what we have seen so far. So initially, we started with understanding the cloud service models, and the cloud service model are mainly software as a service, the platform as a service, and your infrastructure as a service. And we saw that the SAP BTP comes under your platform as a service. And what makes SAP BTP a platform as a service are the combination of environment, and this environment are created by certain software like Cloud Foundry and Kyma. Now Kyma here is a relatively newer environment, and Cloud Foundry here is already a popular open source solution. Now Kyma here is a newer environment which is created by SAP, and this is also an open source software. And Cloud Foundry is created by Pivotal, and this is also a open source software which is out there for quite a while. And when the SAP BTP was initially released, it was called as SAP Cloud Platform. In SAP Cloud Platform, we only had Cloud Foundry and we had new environment. The new environment was later discontinued and we only had the Cloud Foundry. And recently, the Kyma environment is added alongside the Cloud Foundry. As a user, you can either create a Cloud Foundry environment or a Kyma environment. And when we talk about this environment, we are referring to this operating system. So what kind of operating system you want managing your hardware? And this operating system can be either the Cloud Foundry or CF for short, or it can be your Kyma. So any one of this operating system or environment can be selected by user, and based on that environment you have different way to build and deploy applications. Now along with this environment you also have SAP services which are provided to you, and this SAP service can be utilized by your application, or here in this case custom application, or can be directly utilized by the user. And if you want to use this service, you have to create instance of this service and you will be charged based on that. Now this is a broad level overview what we got in the level 1, and this is essential when we go ahead in the consecutive level to learn more and dig deep into this topic. So let's catch up in the level 2 to understand more about SAP BTP, or formerly SAP Cloud Platform. Hello and welcome back. In this level 2, we will be looking into the overview and architecture of SAP BTP platform. We will discuss about one case study of when a user or a customer can be using SAP BTP. We will be also looking into the internal of the softwares of the PaaS platform of SAP BTP, which is the Cloud Foundry and Kyma. We will look into the overview architecture of both of these, so you get an understanding of what we get when we are inside Cloud Foundry or Kyma. Now this level 2 will be required for you to get a basic understanding of these two PaaS solution, and also to understand how the SAP BTP platform will be used by the customer or the user. So let's get started on this. So we are already acquainted with this diagram which we discussed in the previous section. We have the PaaS platform SAP BTP, it have an environment, and there are SAP services like Workflow, BRF, Cloud Mobile Service or BaaS, and there are also services which provides you database capability like HANA, and HANA is a database by SAP, and they basically expose HANA database as a service in your SAP BTP. And also you might have PostgreSQL SQL. So this is a open source database which is quite popular, and you also have many other services similar to our HANA PostgreSQL messaging service and a lot of other services as well. And these services are basically will be utilized when you create app. So we'll see how the entire equation actually fits. Now in this case of your environment, you can either go for Cloud Foundry environment or you go for the Kyma environment. Now imagine you have selected the Cloud Foundry environment, and what will be the scenario? So this is a customer and the name of the customer may be say ABC. Now this customer is having its own on-premise system, and inside the on-premise system the customer is already running with SAP software, and these SAP software are on-premise. You have the SAP systems installed and you also have a database. Now the database can be HANA database or cannot be a HANA database. So this is on-premise system which the customer already have. Now let's talk about the use case. So imagine the customer want to create a sales application, and this sales application is basically designed for the sales representative. So if the sales representative are on the field and they are visiting different client sites. So imagine there is one more customer here, and this is Z Corp, and the representative actually will go to Z Corp and pitch the product which the ABC is actually selling. And the same salesperson will also go to one more Y Corp and sell the particular product. So the requirement here is to provide this salesperson with an application so the salesperson knows which are the leads to be visited, what are their address, what are their phone number. So the salesperson can go and can visit the offices and pitch to the person responsible or pitch to the business decision makers. So that is the requirement which the ABC company have, and they need basically a sales app, or we can say this is a sales lead management application. So this is a very basic sales management application, and this application just need to list all the leads and their addresses and their phone number. So basically contact information, so they can visit the company which are the prospective of the ABC corporation. And as a developer or architect, you have to now design this application, and not only design it, but also create the entire life cycle of this application, because it is not just developing an application and giving it to the salesperson, but also to manage and maintain it over a period of time. So the entire responsibility is now in your head, and what are the things you need to do? So now, as an architect or a technical person, you are given this responsibility. So there are two types of questions which you might be having. First is functional question, which is about what are the features which this app will have, and that is pretty clear. It will have the lead information and the contact detail for the person which the salesperson need to give a visit. So that is the feature. And the second type of questions are technical questions which you might be having if you are given this responsibility, which is what language should I use? Should I use JavaScript, or should I use ABAP? Can I create a report, or should I create this app in Node.js? Now, those are the question which decides the programming language. But there's also a question of DevOps. Where should I be hosting this application? And what if the application is used by thousands of salesperson and they feel a lag? Should I need to have a scaling mechanism already planned out if it required scaling? And how should I manage the security and authorization that only the salesperson which are provided the access can be accessing this application and not any other person, because it will have the contact detail of pretty high profile people, and if a lot of people have access to the application over the internet for free, they can actually misuse those information as well. Now also there is data integration, how the data will be brought from the on-premise system which actually holds the existing lead information, or is there some other third-party system where this data actually exists and I have to basically bring it. And do I need an additional data management, or should I be writing the data, or will this app create some new data footprint? So if this application is creating some new data footprint, then where should it get stored? Should I be creating a new database like PostgreSQL database, or can I use the existing on-premise system database and create a table and store those there? So these are all the technical questions. Now the answer to this will be your SAP BTP. If our ABC corporation is using SAP BTP or SAP Cloud Platform, formerly what it was called, they can create a Cloud Foundry environment within SAP BTP, and this Cloud Foundry environment will have the capability to host the application, to run and manage this application. Now, when I talk about management, you have the capability to provide additional security, or you have the capability to scale up or to scale down the application if there is no need or the application is not used by more people. So you have all the features and functionality to manage the entire life cycle of this custom application, which we also sometimes technically refer to as side by side extension. So side by side extension application. So that is what we have. We have an environment which provides us capability to host, run, manage our new application entire life cycle. So this is one of the primary use of SAP Cloud. You can enhance, or you can basically create custom application based on your business requirement or need. And not only the management and hosting of the application, you can also use existing SAP services if it is required. For example, I can create just for this custom application, because then I have to manage that particular database. Imagine I don't want my existing on-premise system to create this new custom data, because now I don't want my existing on-premise system to store any kind of data of this custom application. So what I can do is I can create one more database, and then I have to basically take care of this database for the rest of the life cycle or rest of the lifetime of this application. So instead of that, what I can do is I can use the SAP services and create the post GRE SQL here, and I can basically use that. So that is also one of the options which I can do. Or if I'm using the on-premise system and they say it's okay to store the data from the on-premise side, then I can also use that. So both this use case we will be actually seeing in our hands-on, because that will be the scenario where you have to basically work as a developer on SAP BTP. So we will be covering both the custom database with PostgreSQL SQL and using the existing on-premise system database and connect to our custom application or the side-by-side extension application, which will be hosted in our Cloud Foundry environment inside your SAP BTP. So just to sum up what actually we have covered, we basically gave you a simple example of a sales lead management application and the challenges which a architect or a technical person might feel and why the need of this environment is there. And the environment basically provide a place for the application to be hosted, to be run and managed. And if there is a need for security or authorization or data integration or database, so all that can be provided to this application with SAP service. So you have to just create an instance of the service and you have to provide to the application and you can use that service. So either database or your security, which is also referred as UAA. So let me use a different color here. Security or UAA, so user authentication and authorization. So this service is also part of SAP service in BTP. You can use this service to authorize user, and based on the authorization, they can use the app or not use the app. Now, this use case we will demonstrate for Cloud Foundry. Our objective will be to show you the hands-on in the Cloud Foundry, both when you are using a database in SAP service and also in case when you want to keep the on-premise system database as the database of the sales application. So that we will show you in the hands-on. Now, before we actually start the hands-on, it will be much better to give you an overall architecture of both these environments. So the Cloud Foundry environment and Kyma environment. So let's catch up in the next section where we will see the overall architecture, what is basically inside the environment, what goes on there. So we will keep it as an overview because both the Cloud Foundry and Kyma are a vast topic and can be a separate course altogether. So let's catch up in the next section to see the overview architecture of Cloud Foundry and Kyma. Hello and welcome back. In this section, we will be talking about the architecture of Cloud Foundry and Kyma. Now, as we already discussed, Cloud Foundry and Kyma both are open source software. Now, the ownership of Cloud Foundry is with the Cloud Foundry Foundation. So you can check it out in Wikipedia. Now, there is also a big history of who was the owner or who were the developer behind the Cloud Foundry. The Cloud Foundry was initially with VMware, then it came to EMC, and then the ownership was with the Pivotal, and now the ownership is with the Cloud Foundry Foundation. Now, if you want to learn more about Cloud Foundry, I will highly recommend our SAP Cloud Foundry course where we have covered in details about Cloud Foundry. This is the 35 hours course, highly recommended for developers and architects and also project manager. Now, Kyma environment is a new environment which you will find in new 2020 2001 or in the later 2020 which was released, and it is also an open source environment and it is donated by SAP themselves. And what exactly are the architecture or the internal component or broad level internal component? Let's discuss that. So the first thing which we will discuss is Cloud Foundry. Now when we talk about Cloud Foundry, it is basically a software application which is installed over a layer of hardware. So you have your infrastructure here, and this infrastructure will be utilized by the Cloud Foundry to optimally distribute load. For example, you want to create a private cloud for yourself. So what you did, you basically occupied bunch of hardware resources and you installed Cloud Foundry over it. Now the installation process of Cloud Foundry required lot of steps, where what you can say is, now what will happen that the Cloud Foundry will be using the extra large machine. For example, this is your XXL machine, or this is XL machine. So 2 extra large machine, and then there are 2 XL machine, and there are multiple large machines. Now what I mean by extra large, so extra large machine is the machine might be having 128 gigabyte of RAM and might be having 10 TB of the hard disk and very huge configuration. And the XL machines can be 64 GB of RAM and maybe 5 TB of the hard disk, and the large machine can be of 32 GB of RAM and maybe 2 TB of the hard disk. This is 16 core CPU, this is 8 core CPU, and this is 4 core CPU. So there are different types if you are going for AWS, or if you are going for Google Cloud Platform or DigitalOcean or other vendors which provides hardware infrastructure for rent. So what can happen is, if you're trying to install Cloud Foundry, you will be basically installing the brain of the Cloud Foundry, which is all the main operation head in one of this extra large machine, which will be acting as a manager of how can this small machine computation unit can be utilized, or extra large machine computation unit can be utilized. And one of the machine can act as your router. So all these features which the Cloud Foundry have, it will basically be managed by the master or the main machine, where all the main decision of the Cloud Foundry, it can be like, how can I make use of these independent resources? What are the routes to be used, or how to invoke a new services, which will be managed by this main node, which is where the brain of the Cloud Foundry will be installed, and the other computers or computation units or resources will be utilized by this app code. So hosting of this app or running of this particular app, like the sales app, what we discussed in the previous section. So this particular app will require some kind of memory like RAM and the hard disks to store, and also networking capability. So those computation resources will be utilized within these machines, or there will be one small container which will be created for your app, and your app will go and sit inside that particular container, and some other machine might be responsible for routing. So for example, if you're trying to access this app from the web, then how to reach this app? So what is the URL of this particular app? So maybe there is this route machine which will be responsible for handling of the routing. So that machine will be basically taking all this decision of the routing activity. So similar to this, there are multiple features which this app will have, and all that features are provided by this Cloud Foundry application which is installed over this hardware. So not only it is utilizing the hardware to run itself, but it is also utilizing the hardware to provide you computation resources for your application which you want to host or you want to run or manage within this Cloud Foundry environment. So you can ask this question, okay, in the previous scenario, I can just have one VM and I can just kind of create this VM, and this VM may be running a Ubuntu machine, and I can just put my application there and I just keep a database there. And why not to do that? why should I go for a Cloud Foundry environment? Why should I be managing a extra layer of a application which will be managing my app code? I can just put it in my VM and this VM will be just fine. Now to answer this question, this will be fine, but imagine you have tens or thousands of application like this app code which might be locking the virtual machine. Now sometime what happens is if a application need computation, it should be provided that. For example, suddenly if my sales app is a hit and everyone in my organization is using the sales app, then I can easily add extra resources to it and maybe add the extra RAM to it, or I can basically create the same app in 3 different machines or different cell. So that will be basically the horizontal scaling, and increasing the RAM size and increasing the CPU size will be your vertical scaling. So I can do this thing pretty quickly or in an instance when I am in the Cloud Foundry environment. But if the app don't get so much popularity, then I can just keep it in a single small container or a small machine. So in that case, I don't have to lock in a virtual machine resource. So that is what it is all about. The Cloud Foundry basically manages optimally the resource usage. With the resource here is hardware resource, and also you can say connectivity, which is networking. So the Cloud Foundry basically is a specialized software which have the capability to optimally provide the hardware resource capability to thousands of applications which you as a customer or a customer might be implementing as an extension. So that is why the use of Cloud Foundry is there. Now, the Cloud Foundry also have the dynamic runtime environment creation. So what happens is whenever you push the application inside the Cloud Foundry environment, the application will tell the Cloud Foundry that, okay, this is a Node application, or this is a Python application, or a Java application, or a Go language application. And accordingly, what the Cloud Foundry will do is somewhere within this hardware resource, it will create a small cell, and this cell will be provided some computation unit. So this shell may be provided with 4 GB RAM and maybe 10 GB of hard disk space, and a container of, imagine this is a node based application, then a container will be created, and this container on top of having some resources will also be provided some runtime environment which are required for a node application to run. So for example, if our app comes inside here, then it gets the node environment. So to pick it in a simple word, the Node.js libraries will be installed, and the resources, which is the RAM and the hard disk and networking capability, will be provided, and a container internally somewhere will be created, and our application will be put inside this container. And as a developer, you will be provided access to this particular application via some route. So you can basically access this application. So let me just kind of bring it here, and you are here, and you get a nice URL which you can go, and this hosted application, you can easily access it. And all this is then managed by Cloud Foundry internally, where to create this particular container, which is referred to as a cell, and this cell management happens internally by the Cloud Foundry, how the routes need to be created and how the logs need to be managed. So for example, if there is something wrong happening, then you can know that by seeing the log. And there is also messaging which can happen if you have certain services, then how the service integration can be done. So imagine you are using a database here, then how the database basically integrate to the application. So your application can store data to the database. So all that is managed by your Cloud Foundry environment. So this is why Cloud Foundry is so much useful, because it manages everything internally, and it will not only optimize the hardware resources usage, but also it will allow the developer to use the cloud or a private cloud without having to know a lot of things about what is happening or going on. So there is an abstraction which is provided by the Cloud Foundry, and this is very important because this developer here don't want to really get into details about cloud when they are specifically focused on creating a sales lead management application. So that is what the Cloud Foundry provides. Now Cloud Foundry can also, as we already discussed, integrate with existing services. So it can be database or message broker service or workflow service of SAP. So all that can happen. It can integrate the application to that. And also there is this connection and destination service. So you can reach to a on-premise system. For example, we have the customer database and server, and that are stored in the customer side. Then through the connection and destination, the Cloud Foundry can provide the connection to this application and reach to the customer on-premise system. So this is customer on-premise system, and using the connection and destination services, you can basically use the SAP BTP platform to connect the on-premise system to your application. So this is something which we will also see in our hands-on section. And also security and authorization. You can create rules for security and authorization of this application. So only those person will be accessing the application which you have explicitly given privileges, and not everyone will be having the capability to see this application. So these are all the essential things to develop and manage this application. And with the help of SAP BTP and using the Cloud Foundry environment, it can be done pretty easily. And this entire process is same if you want to create one custom application or you want to create 10,000 custom application. So that is the reason for the use of Cloud Foundry inside SAP BTP, which is the platform as a service environment of SAP. Okay, I hope that you got a good understanding of what is Cloud Foundry and what it does. Now, just to summarize what we discussed here. Now, we discussed that SAP Cloud Foundry provides a platform as a service environment, and this is a software which is installed over a bunch of hardwares, and this hardware infrastructure will be holding the brain of the software or the master node, which controls the usage of the other machines. And the machines can be of different sizes. Some may be big machine or having more RAM and CPU, and some may be smaller machines. And whenever you push your application to the Cloud Foundry internally creates a cell, and this cell will be provided computation unit, and based on your application code, the required libraries will be installed here so the application code can run there. And if the application needs some service to be created, then the service you need to instantiate, and you can connect to the cell, and the service can be a DB cell or message broker or any other service provided in SAP BTP. You can also use the connection and destination for this application to reach to on-premise system or any other third-party API or destination. You can also provide security and authorization and also routing for this application. These are all internally managed with the Cloud Foundry environment, and as a developer, you will be just handing over the code to the Cloud Foundry to host it and run it. And in return, you will be getting a URL, and this URL is something which you can share with the user to use the application or consume the application. So we will see more when we go into hands-on about Cloud Foundry. Now, I hope that you got a good understanding of what actually is Cloud Foundry and what goes inside when you try to create an application inside the Cloud Foundry. So with this in mind, let's go into the next environment, which is the Kyma environment, and get an overview understanding of the architecture of Kyma environment as well. So in this section, we will be talking about the Kyma environment, and Kyma environment is a relatively new add-on to SAP BTP. Now, Kyma is an open source application which is donated by SAP to the open source community, and what the Kyma environment does. Now, the Kyma environment can be utilized over Kubernetes, and Kubernetes basically will be utilizing Kyma environment to extend existing application. So what I mean by all that? So let's first try to understand in a nutshell what is Kubernetes and what it does. Now, Kubernetes is also an open source software, and this software basically acts like a cloud foundry. And the primary role of Kubernetes is to manage container. Now, what is a container? For example, here we have a container, and a container will have certain runtime environment, will have certain memory, which is basically RAM and the hard disk provided to it, and it will also have some networking capability, so it can talk to the outside world. So it has networking capability, and it is a small independent unit which can run the application code, or the application code can sit here and can run. So it is acting as a small VM. So we already discussed in the previous section that what is a cell, and here in this case, in the world of Kubernetes, we are basically talking about a Docker container. So you will see that the Kubernetes a lot of time will be using Docker container, and this small container will be running your application, and the Kubernetes platform will be managing multiple Docker containers. So the situation or the scenario is same. In the Cloud Foundry, we were having multiple Diago cells, and they were managed by the Cloud Foundry. Now, in the case of Kubernetes, also in short K8, we have multiple Docker container, and this Docker container are managed by the Kubernetes platform, and this individual container run some piece of code. It can be your application or some part of your application. Now, you might be also seeing in future that the Docker will be replaced with some other technology, but there will be still containers or small execution unit which are managed by the Kubernetes. But speaking about what is currently present, these containers are exactly what we have as a cell, and the Kubernetes basically is running on top of the hardware. And here we have the hardware resources, and it is basically utilizing the hardware in a similar way. It has somewhere a master node, which is the brain, and it basically puts all the containers somewhere in the machine, and based on the need, it allocates memory, and in a short, it allocates the resources to our application. So as a developer, you will be interacting with the Kubernetes, and you will be providing your application code to Kubernetes, and the Kubernetes will accordingly create container, and with the help of Kubernetes, you can scale the application up or down. You can create multiple instances of the application. You can start and stop your application, and these are all then managed by this Kubernetes engine. So you got a gist or summary of it, what is happening. We don't want to go inside Kubernetes because it is also in itself quite a big topic. So we don't want to really spend a lot of time exploring Kubernetes. Now, what is happening is, imagine you have a lot of applications which are running in your Kubernetes, and these applications are basically running for a lot of time. So maybe 2 years or 3 years, and you need to write a small additional extension. For example, this is the sales application, and this sales application is quite popular, and it is used by 10,000 people, and it is one of the star application of your company, and there is a small new feature which need to be added. So what can be done? Now you can say, okay, we can change the application code and we can again deploy the same application. But many times when you have to write some piece of code, then you need to test that properly before you deploy. And it can happen that if that piece of code is not tested properly, then the existing application, which is already very popular, can basically start to get bugs. So that is what someone don't want an existing code which is already nicely working smoothly to be start behaving in a weird way, because more and more the code runs, the more stable or the more bugs removal happens and more stable it becomes over time. So if you have any new features where you can put or how you can extend the particular application, and if you want to provide certain kind of monitoring activity to this container which is running your code to just keep in check if the container is properly functioning or not functioning, or you need to provide authentication to a user who is using application to that particular app. So it can happen that you need to provide additional authentication, authorization, or as a developer, you might be required the need to see the logs of this Docker container to monitor if it is running properly and smoothly. So these are the main reason why the Kyma environment came into picture. The first is to extend our existing application which is running in a container. So how can that be extended, and to provide extra capabilities of monitoring or logging. So a lot of things which are additional to container management can be utilized with the Kyma environment, but primarily as an extension to your application which is already working. Now let's go into the details about the Kyma environment to see how it is actually done. So, and before we actually go to the details of the Kyma environment, we will just summarize what we have discussed. We have discussed first that we have Kubernetes, and Kubernetes is basically an open source container orchestration framework. And container is nothing but a small virtual machine which is inside any of your VM, and this virtual machine will be running your application, can have networking capability, and will be having some kind of runtime environment which is what the application required to run its code. And the Kubernetes basically work as a orchestration framework, and it is a open source software which is created by Google. Now Kyma works on top of Kubernetes to provide extension of this container application. Now the extension is adding additional feature. So this application is already running and you want to add additional feature to this application. So that is where Kyma comes into picture, or primarily comes into picture. With the Kyma, you can create serverless function, which we'll just discuss in a moment. And also Kyma provide bunch of other tool for monitoring, for logging. So it basically provide monitoring and logging tools which you can use as a developer to monitor the virtual machine, or here the container which is running your code. So that is what we have in a nutshell. Now let's go into next section to get a little detail about what is Kyma and what actually it does. So in this section, we will be seeing what is the use of Kyma, and internally what is the functionality which is provided and how it actually works. Now Kyma basically sits on top of an existing container management system, and here we are talking about, for example, Kubernetes. And Kubernetes is basically a open source container orchestration framework which manages container, and the container are kind of small virtual machine which runs your application. So they already have dedicated memory, they have dedicated networking capability, and also have dependency required to run the application. It can be a Node.js dependency, Java virtual machine, or Java engine. So all those dependency they have which are necessary to run the application code. Now the application code is what is your actually business logic here. Now what Kyma does is, if your application wants some kind of enhancement, then what it does is it provides a connectivity from the application, and that small enhancement code can be written as a serverless function. So now what is the serverless function? Now serverless function are nothing but a small code. Now this code will be invoked by some kind of event. So an event will happen, and inside the code we might have this logic that whenever the event E1 happens, you trigger this code and that event happens, and this code is basically subscribed to this particular event, and this code is executed. And it can happen that inside the code you might be talking to some third-party service, or you might be talking to some SAP based services. So it can be a database, or it can be some other service of workflow. So those also can happen, that this code is basically talking to those service or making some calls to other service, and when the execution is done, the control just passes through this. So it's just a piece of code which is subscribed to some kind of event, and the application connector basically connects the application to our serverless function based on some kind of event. Now, to give you an example here, imagine we have the sales application, and the sales application has a search and is having a list here, and all leads are called. And whenever a lead is called from the salesperson 1, maybe S1 here, the other salesperson who is using the same application might not know to not to call the same lead. So what we can have as an extension to this application is a small serverless function. Now, this new serverless function we can have as a code, and this code can be triggered whenever this salesperson S1 has called someone and they mark that particular lead as called. Then that event is triggered, that okay, this particular salesperson is called. Then once that event is triggered, then the function is executed. So this particular serverless function is basically subscribed to an event which is triggered from the application, which is once a lead is called, then what it will do is it will mark that particular lead inside the code as already qualified, which will filter out the lead in subsequent open of the application. So if the salesperson 2 is opening the application, then they will not be seeing the lead which is called. So our serverless function is subscribed to an event, and it basically runs a piece of code, and that's all. Once the piece of code is written, then the control goes through them. And this small piece of code can be enhancement, can be an improvement to the existing application which is already running. So that is what the Kyma environment provides. Kyma environment basically has 3 main ingredients. One is the application connector, which connect to the existing application, then the serverless function, and then the third-party cloud services or third-party services which this serverless function can connect. So these are the 3 main things which the Kyma environment provides. It also uses a lot of other open source tools for monitoring, where you can monitor the status of the container, and also you can see logs, and also you can trace errors, or you can provide authentication to this application. So there are a lot of other open source applications like Grafana, Prometheus, Loki, and Dex. So these are open source applications from the Kubernetes world. So those open source applications support Kyma also provides if you want to use them. So we'll not be going much into Kyma now because our scope is mostly into the Cloud Foundry within this particular course. In the Kyma hands-on also, we will just cover the Hello World example. We'll not be extending the Kyma because over time the Kyma platform might be changing drastically. So we don't want to really create a lot of content which will be obsolete. So with that, I hope that you got a good understanding of what Kyma environment is or why Kyma environment will be used. And with this, we come to the end of this level 2, where what you got is an internal architectural understanding of Cloud Foundry. And we discuss within this Cloud Foundry the cells and the cell management, and also how this environment help us to host and manage an application and also connect to other services. And similarly, we also saw in the Kyma environment how it can be utilized, or basically the functionality to be utilized as extension of the existing application which are running with container management system like Kubernetes. And it also have the capability to use existing open source tool from the Kubernetes world to provide capability of monitoring or authentication or debugging or error tracing. So all that it provides to you, and I will say here K8 cloud function, and the open source software can be utilized here. So that is the two things which we basically saw within this section, a overall architecture. Now in the next section, we will start the hands-on from the Cloud Foundry side. So let's catch up in the next section to start the hands-on from a very basic to advanced level. Hello and welcome back. In this section, we will start the level 3, and in the level 3, our objective will be to first understand the account structure of SAP BTP. So how this SAP BTP is structured, this is essential for you to understand before you start any kind of development. And we will create a free trial account in SAP BTP, or we will show you how you can create a free trial account which is free for you if you want to learn or you want to explore SAP BTP. Then we will focus our attention towards Cloud Foundry. We will install the Cloud Foundry CLI, which is the command line interface. And this we will do in our personal computer. Now, using the CLI, you can control the Cloud Foundry environment. You can create service, you can create and deploy application, you can scale application. So many basic sample commands we will see, which is essential to you to understand as a developer. Then we will create a simple Node.js application, and this Node.js application we will take from the GitHub. We have already developed a Node.js application, and this is a simple sales app. Now you have the sales app where you have a simple search and the list of all the leads. Now you can search a lead with their name or address, and that particular lead will be filtered. So this is a very basic Node.js application which we have created, and this application doesn't have any database. We will see over time how to use this application with database and SAP on-premise system, but we will be first taking this application and we will be deploying it to our SAP Cloud Foundry with the CLI. Then we will also see the use of YAML file and how you can write a lot of configuration step into this YAML file. Now, many times you might have those files in a different format like mtar file. So we will not be seeing mtar version of the YAML because these are specifically for SAP based projects which you might be doing via Bash Studio. You can also refer to Bash course if you want to know more how you can go for mtar file. Now our objective will mostly be to cover the Cloud Foundry development. Then we will also see how we can use the YAML file, and this YAML file will be the place where you as a developer can tell the Cloud Foundry what kind of code you are sending to the Cloud Foundry or what kind of services this application need to communicate with, or what kind of other application this particular application is linked to or dependent upon. So many things we will see over time with this YAML file will have the configuration. Then we'll also see the logs, which is very essential if you go into a situation where there are some kind of errors. And finally, we will also explore the Kyma environment, and we will be creating a simple hello world function. Now our objective will be mostly on the Cloud Foundry environment because at this present moment, Cloud Foundry development is matured out and it has a quite straightforward way of development. Now over time, you will see more and more add-on to the cloud platform or the SAP BTP, what is called now. But at present moment, this will be the standard or way of development with SAP BTP. So let's start first understanding the account structure, what we have in the SAP BTP, and then we will be going into the hands-on for our development part. Welcome back. In this section, we will see first how you can create a free trial account with SAP BTP. You just have to enter in the Google BTP free trial, and the first link of SAP which you will have will be your SAP BTP platform trial. Now, if you go inside the SAP BTP platform trial, then what you can see here is start your free trial. Now, you can register here, provide your email, phone number, and it will also ask you to accept some terms and conditions. And also in the next screen, it will ask you a one-time password, which is also sent to your phone number to verify. Now, creating a free trial account is free for now, and with a free trial, you will get access to SAP BTP platform for 1 year. And this is a free trial account, which will have some limitation as well. Now, I'm not going to create the account because I already have the account created, and it is quite straightforward process. You have to just fill your personal details and it will allow you to create the account. Now, if you want to also see those steps, then I will highly recommend to go into UI5CN system setup course to see how to create your free trial account in SAP BTP. Now, when you are inside your SAP BTP, let me enter your trial account. Then you will see first the global space. So this is the home page of the account or trial home. Now, if you are having a business account, then you might have multiple other global account as well. Now, the first term which might be new to you if you are new to SAP BTP is the global account. So just keep that in mind because we are going to come back to that and discuss on this in a moment. But before that, I want to show you a structure of what we have. Now, in the left hand side, you can see some of the features which you can carry out in your global account. Now, if you go inside this trial, this is a sub account. Now, the global account can have one or multiple sub account. And if I go inside the sub account, then I'm going to basically see some different features here. You can see that there are service marketplace, subscription, cloud foundry, security users, connection destination, entitlements. And you can see there are cloud foundry environment, Kyma environment, and entitlements. So inside a global account, we have sub account, and inside sub account, we have spaces. So if you see here in the right hand side, we have a dev space. And if I go inside the space, then we have some application. And also the feature or functionality or the activity which you can do in the space are also different. Like you can create instance, you can have security group, create members or add members, add routes. So these are different features. So this is how the accounts are actually provided to you in SAP BTP. Now let's try to first understand it in a theory because there are a lot of information here which can confuse you. So when we talk about the account structure, we just saw here a sample SAP BTP account, and the SAP BTP can have one or multiple global account. Now, when you are entering the SAP BTP in a free trial, then you only have one global account. And now global account are basically associated with the license or the contract which your company have. So this is your company, and this company has what kind of contract to use SAP BTP. And global account are basically there to take care of those license and contract. And inside this global account, whatever the activities or how you are billed as a customer, all that are managed within the global account. Now, global account is also associated to your cost. So you will also be getting some entitlements within your global account, which will be then passed down. Now, what are these entitlements? So imagine that you went to SAP and you say, okay, I want to implement SAP BTP platform in my organization or for my partner. So they will say, okay, this is the account which is given to you, and that account will be the global account. And within that account, there might be some contract, and that contract will be referring to your global account. And also the entitlements is provided to you, which is what kind of resources within the global account are provided to you. So this entitlement can include what kind of RAM is provided to you, what kind of CPU usage is provided to you, how many services are provided to, what kind of services are provided to you. So in SAP BTP, all the features or the standard application which SAP is providing are provided to you as services. So it can be database service or app-to-app messaging service, or you can have workflows as a service. So those workflow or using a ID like SAP BAS. So these are exposed to you as a service. And what kind of service are provided to you? SAP BAS, which is used by the developers for doing any kind of development, or ABAP environment. So these are provided to you as a service, and all these entitlements basically are provided to you on a global account level, and they are also referred as quotas. So this is the global quota, and based on your license or contract, these quotas will be allocated to your company or to your project or team, and then they will be passed out into sub-account. So you can generalize this and say that global account are for business administration purpose. So this is how agreements between your company and SAP is carried out, and it is directly one-to-one related to a license or a contract between your company and SAP. And whatever the quota is assigned here, or the amount of quota you are taking and are willing to pay, that quota are then further subdivided and distributed. So in a nutshell, you are basically taking a service plan from a provider, and you subdivide that service plan internally, and you basically assign it to different sub accounts. Now, what is a sub account? Now, sub account is where you will spend a lot of your time as well. Now, sub account is the place where you have your PaaS environment. Now, sub accounts are basically the place where you will be creating the instance of your PaaS environment. Now, it can be Cloud Foundry, it can be Kyma environment, and it can be any other environment which might come in future, like Kubernetes or other kind of environment, which makes a infrastructure and convert into a PaaS. Now, whenever a sub account is created, it is basically created in a one single region. So it can happen that the account is created in US AWS. So all the services, all the apps, all the connectivity or networking will be stored here in US AWS. So this is the location where all your sub account related information will be stored. So this is one-to-one. So whenever you create a sub account, you need to tell what is the location this sub account need to be created, and this is the region where all the infrastructure are allocated. And on top of that infrastructure, you have to decide what kind of environment you have to create. So for example, you are creating a sub account on US AWS, then within that sub account, do you need a Cloud Foundry environment or a Kyma environment, or you can have both. Now within here also you have access to creating service instance, and when you create a service instance, you will get access to some kind of feature, or it can be a database service, it can be a messaging service, or a BAP environment service. So those kind of service, and sometimes you are basically subscribing to those service. So you are taking the subscription of that particular service. So based on the usage of the service, you will be charged. Now we are not going to talk about how you will be charged, because those are some of the scope which are outside the developer, and this is something also which we want to keep separate, because our scope will be only towards where the developer will be responsible. Now many a time when you want to use a service, you have to basically subscribe to that particular service. So it means that you want to use that feature. It can be a BaaS development or a workflow development. You are subscribing to that particular service, and it will create the necessary environment for you to work with the BaaS or workflow, and based on that you will be charged. So this is also done in the sub account level, and you will also have the connection and destination which you can manage from sub account. Now the management of the member we will talk at the end. Now whenever you create a Cloud Foundry environment within your sub account, you will be also creating a org. So the org is getting created whenever you have a Cloud Foundry, or whenever you create the Cloud Foundry environment within your sub account, and the sub account will have one-to-one relationship with your org. So this is fixed. Now inside your sub account, you can further subdivide a particular sub account into multiple spaces. So this is 0 or many. So the sub account can have 0 and star, like many spaces. And a space are the place where you have your application hosted. You can have your application, you can have your routes. So that is the place your application basically goes and gets created. And you also have the capability to subscribe to a service or create instance of the service within the space as well. So this is the overall structure, and if you see closely, the top level is basically for business administration. So your business are basically using the global account to allocate or to create the license or to charge the B2B deals or contracts, the sub-account contracts, and you will be having a fixed quota assigned, and that is basically passed down to the sub-account. So you have some kind of quota, and one quota will be assigned to this, and out of that, a lot of quotas which the company purchase, few of the resources is provided to the sub-account, and then sub-account then pass down those quota to multiple spaces which are created within that sub-account. And the sub-account is place where you will be having specific destinations, specific services, and the spaces are the place where you have specific applications. So space are for application, sub-account are for administration, and global account are for business administration. So that is a small thumb rule which you can follow. Now coming to the user. Now there are two types of user which can be there. One is the platform user and business user. So platform users are kind of admins who might be developers also, and they are responsible for configuration and they are responsible for setting up of the environments. So they might be setting up the sub accounts, they might be changing or adding destination, or they might be creating services, and they can also be developers also. So developer or admin. So I will say that. Then the second type is the business user. So these are the users which uses the final application. So they might be functional people who just want to use an application and they don't want to get into any kind of technicality, what is there inside the cloud platform or this BTP. So they are the business users. Now you can assign users on a different level. You can assign developers who are doing work on a specific project in the space level. You can assign admins on the sub account level, and you can also manage main admins who are responsible for the entire platform administration in the global account level as well. And it is always advisable to have at least two admin. One is the main and one can act as a backup. So that is what we have when we talk about the account structure. Now coming back to our BTP, and you can see here that we have this global account. Now we are in free trial, so we only have one global account. If you have a contract with SAP and are using BTP, then you can see the capability to create multiple global account as well. And inside this trial global account, we have the capability to create new sub accounts as well. And this is the default sub account trial which is provided to us. And as we already told that this sub account is having one particular location where all the resources are focused. And for me, this trial is in Europe, Frankfurt. And let me create a new sub account. That will be the first thing it will ask. So you can see, I can say demo sub account 01 and demo account, you can say, and you can select what kind of infrastructure provider you want. Currently we have only two, and in some cases you will also see Alibaba and Google as well. So there are multiple other providers which you might not see in the trial. And let me select AWS and region. So this is where we have already mentioned that a particular sub account is fixed for a particular region. So let me go for US East. And one of the popular way of selecting the region is what is near to you. Now that is optional here. That is not fixed that you have to select the region which is near to you. It can happen that you are in US and you are selecting Australian region or European region. Now you need to give a name or subdomain here. So I can just use the same name here as subdomain, demo sub account ACC. So let me create. Now the subdomain and the sub account also have one-to-one mapping. Now the most important thing here to remember is a particular sub account is basically associated with one particular location where all the service will be allocated to you. So let me go inside this newly created sub account, and what it will have is, it doesn't have anything. It has some of the quota which is assigned to you. Now the quota are nothing but how much you can do stuff. So it can be like how much capability you have. So is it a lot of things you can do? Then you have to pay for a lot of things, and that is basically then provided from the global account level. So the global account will have the contract, and based on the contract you can have the capability to create a lot of services of different types, and that quota or entitlements are then passed down. And you can see here the entitlements entity assignments. You can see what are the entity which is assigned to this global account. And let me select the sub account, and then I will select the all sub account. So within all sub account, how much the assignment is there, and you can see that these are all the services or capability which is provided. So, and you can see here demo sum account have one shared unit, and remaining is one shared unit. And if you use that particular unit, then you cannot use it. So the unit are something which you will see over and over, and what this signifies is how much quantity of that particular service you can use. Now I'm calling it quantity because taking an example, imagine, let's take the example of database here just to give you a simple example. So if we are creating a database and we have one unit assigned to it, what that means that we can create one instance of the database only. And if we create one database, then we'll not be able to create second database. So if you have the contract, then based on the contract, you can also have 10 units here. So you can create 10 database instance, and they will be all independent database. So that is about the unit. So unit are nothing but the number of instance you can create of that particular service, to be speaking in a nutshell. Now you can also see one more thing here, trial, light, default. Now they are the type that service have. Now a service can have multiple type. You can see here process integration runtime has integration flow, API. So these are two plans we have. Now you are seeing one more property here, trial. Now different service has different properties, value here, integration flow, API. And what is this? Now, if you scroll up, these are plans. So let me scroll up just to show you plans. Now, a same service can have different plan. So for example, let me come to your HDI container here. Now, HDI container are a way to store data, and these are virtual HANA database. Now, you can create the HDI container with a HDI shared plan. So you are basically getting a shared instance of HANA database. So you are basically getting access to a HDI container from the shared pool. And if you want more secure HDI container, then you can select this secure store. When you want to use a particular service, you have to create an instance of the service. So you have to also tell what is the plan which I want to go. So these plans can be more robust or can be just for experimentation. For example, the HDI shared can be for a experimentation project. And if you want to implement it in the production scenario, then you have to go for secure store HDI container. And based on different plans, you might be incurring different type of cost as well for the same service. So this is what you will find. You will find a service have multiple plans, and as a user of BTP, you have some quota to use that service and how many instances you can create. And you can share those instances to different sub account, and your global account will be having that capability to share that across different sub account. And coming to the sub account, I can also go into a particular sub account and I can see my entitlement or quotas there. So I can scroll down here and I can see what are the entitlements for this sub account I have. So this is my entitlements, and you can see that service operator one shared instance, and container one shared unit, and sub account audit one shared unit. These are remaining quotas. So you get a basic overview of quota, plan, and service. Now coming to our PaaS solution or PaaS software. Now if you want to use the Cloud Foundry here, then you can enable the Cloud Foundry here. Now accordingly, you have to also select the plan here. Currently, we only have one plan. Now if you are in a paid account, then you might see things differently. And here you can see that the instance and org name is assigned. And whenever you create the Cloud Foundry, the org is also created. And the org and the sub-account has one-to-one mapping. Now let's create it. Now the concept of org comes from the Cloud Foundry. Cloud Foundry is the PaaS solution, which is also getting used in multiple other software vendor landscape. So we have a Cloud Foundry account with us. Now you have an API endpoint to that particular Cloud Foundry. You have an org name, you have an org ID, and there is no space attached to this particular org. Now let's create a space. Now before we create a space, I want to share one small detail. Now this org name is important because whenever you are trying to push an application, then it will ask you which org you want to target, because it will not ask which sub account, it will ask you which org you want to target. And this is the org which you want to then provide or select. And then the next question will be, okay, which space you want to target, because applications are basically sitting inside space. So let me create a dev space here, and I will assign myself the role of manager, developer, auditor. And within a moment, I will have space also created, and I can navigate inside the space. And I don't have any application here. So whenever I push my application, it will come and sit here. So that is what we have. Now in the left hand side, you can see here we have the services, and let me go inside service marketplace. Now service marketplace is a location from where you can see what are the different service you can instantiate. So it can happen that you want your application to have either destination or connectivity option, and you create the destination and connectivity service instance. Now what are those? Why we will use those, we will see over time when we go into development of the application, but I'm just giving you a scenario, so you have to assume for now. So whenever we create this service instance, then we can use within this particular space. Now you will also see that if we create any service instance, then whatever the service instance we are using, it will show us inside this instance. Now let me go to the trial sub account where I already have certain application and services. So if I go inside the trial, and let me go inside this dev space, and you can see there are already 3 applications. And if I go into the instance here, then you can see there are a lot of service instance which I have created the instance of, and there are different plans also, and you can see keys here. And if I click any particular record, so let me click on this Postgres database, and let me try to just increase the size here. What I have here is a detail of the PostgreSQL, and there is a credential, and then there are service keys. Now the first thing shows here that what are the different applications which are using this particular service. If I click here in the action, then I can unbind also. That means I can separate those applications from this service. So this application will no longer be able to use this service. So you are seeing here the option in the graphical user interface or in the cloud cockpit or the BTP cockpit. In the Cloud Foundry also, we will have equivalent CLI command to unbind or separate application from a service. Because at the end of the day, a lot of application will be utilizing your services, which can be your database service, your messaging service, your integration service, and the application need to bind to that service to be able to talk to that service. And the binding is carried out with the help of key. So you can see here credentials here, and you get the username, password, hostname, SSL keys. So different kind of service might have different kind of keys or credential to connect with that particular service. So here we are talking about database. Now it can be a messaging service. So they might have a different credentials. And you can also have a separate key. Now you can use this key to connect from a command line interface if you want to manage this service. So these are the credentials which are created when I created the database, and database here is a kind of a service, you can also have a different keys also, which are not the default key which are created. And you can create these keys and provide it to multiple admins. And if you want those admin to no longer have access to the service, then you can just delete their credentials and they will not be able to control or monitor this particular service. So this is a overview about the service marketplace, and whenever we create an instance of that particular service, we have that in the instance here. And let me go now to my trial instance, which is my sub account. And inside my sub account, I also have the service marketplace, and from here also I can subscribe and I can also create instance of a service. And you can see here there are 73 services what I have. And inside my space, if I go to my space, then how many service I have there. So let me go inside my space, and inside service marketplace, I have here all 58. So that means that the service which are offered to you might not be the same when it comes to the space. So inside that space, you will be more focused to only application development, and relative services are provided there, and you can create instance of that particular service. And in the sub account level, you are basically controlling the entire space and also the entire environment. So different kind of services are provided to you. Now coming to your instance and subscription. Now there are some applications which are provided to you as a SaaS application. For example, the SAP business application and workflow management, you can see here they are SaaS application. So those are two ways. So either you can subscribe to a service, or you can create an instance for yourself of that particular service to use it. Now you can see here I have two environments. One is a Cloud Foundry environment, one is a Kyma environment. Regarding the Kyma environment, we will talk later at the end of this particular section. And we're talking more about Cloud Foundry because at present, more of the Cloud Foundry development is getting carried on. And coming to the other functionality, connectivity here. So you can see here that you can create destination, and it can be an on-premise destination if you have an on-premise system and you want to reach that particular system. And you can also use Cloud Connector, which we will also see at the later point of this particular course. And using the Cloud Connector, you can connect to your on-premise system also, and you can access database or on-premise system tables. And the sub-account also provide functionality for user management, providing specific roles and configuration of security to those roles, and providing specific roles and roles collection, so those user can carry out activity based on that. Now our focus here will be mostly development, and we will also recommend that if you want to know and learn Cloud Foundry in detail, we highly recommend you to go for SAP Cloud Foundry course in UI5CN platform. Now what we'll do next is we will try to connect to this Cloud Foundry, and within this Cloud Foundry we only have one space for now. Cloud Foundry CLI, then it will ask the org name, and then it will ask which space you want to log in. And you can create application within the space, you can delete, remove, and do all kind of activities there. So we will be doing those steps in the next section. So we will try to reach this space via CLI and try to push a very basic Node.js application. Now, one question you might be having is, I got an idea about SAP BTP, it has a global account, sub account, and space. Now, as a business or in my project, how the structure will be? Because I'm seeing this trial, I can create accounts, but how the structuring will be if I'm in a project or if I go in a company. So how the structure will already be laid out to me. So that is the fun thing which is remaining of theory part. Then we will go into the practical hands-on for the application development part. So let's first complete that before we move to CLI hands-on. So what you are seeing here is how you will find the structure within your company if they are using SAP BTP. Now, the global account we already have mentioned that is basically for contract purpose or the licensing purpose for the company and SAP. And if you are using a paid SAP BTP account, then you can create multiple global account which might have multiple different license as well. So that will be the case. And if you are going in for a free trial, then you will have one single global account. Inside this global account, there can be multiple sub accounts. So for example, the finance team can have 3 sub accounts: sub account development, sub account quality, and sub account production. And the development can have multiple projects, and based on the project, project A might be allocated a space, project B might be allocated a space, project C might be allocated a space. And these all projects are where the development of that project is done, not the productive usage is happening of that application. And once the development is complete, then the application might be moved to the quality space. And once the testing is done in the quality space, then the application might be moved to the production. So this is how the structure will be of different sub account, and all this different sub account might be subscribed to different kind of services, or might be creating instance of different service, or might be subscribed to different service. So different service instance or subscription might be created within different sub account, and they might be different. And similarly, the marketing team can also have 3 different sub account. One is used for development, one is for quality, and one is for production. And each sub account might have different services, different connectivity option, different members and users. So all that can be different for each sub account within the marketing as well. And each space will be basically assigned for a single project, or 2 or 3 projects can share a single space. So that is how a typical scenario will be when you go and see the usage of the account in your organization. And there might be also a sample template sub account which can be used as a template while creating different sub accounts. So this sub account is already set up, and this template can be utilized, and based on the different type, so it can be a development template or a quality template, and they can be easily replicated, and different sub account can be created. So this is how the structuring can be within the organization. And over time, there is a high chances that you might see here changes. There is also this introduction to directories where multiple sub account are grouped together to create a directory. And there are a lot of changes which are happening every day on BTP. So we are not covering a lot of new changes which you might see if you are consuming this content after a few years. Now there are many changes which are happening to SAP BTP over the period of the time. So if you are watching this course after a few years, then you might also see the introduction to directory. And directory at this point are nothing but combination of multiple sub account. Now this can also change, or the usage of multiple spaces or account can also change, or they may stick the same. So based on the time, the structuring is also changing. So I will highly recommend to check our UFFCN website if you're watching this course in any other platform like Udemy or YouTube, because that is the place where we constantly try to keep the content updated, because the SAP BTP space or SAP Cloud space is constantly evolving and will be constantly evolving in future as well. Okay, so just to summarize what we have covered within this section, we have covered what is the global account and what is sub account, and within the sub account, what are spaces. And we have also shown how the quotas or entitlements are passed on from global account to sub account to spaces. And we know now that in the sub account level and the space level, we can create instance of service or subscribe to the service. And inside the space, we basically have the capability to host our application. And this application need to bind to a service to basically use that particular service. So we will see in details when we go in the hands-on what are those and how to do that. And we have also seen that the global account have quotas or entitlement which are passed to the sub account, and the sub account basically passed to the space. So this quota basically limit how many service instance you can create, how many memory or CPU usage or resource utilization you can do. And we also came to know that inside the sub account, you can enable PaaS environment. And using this PaaS environment, you can do third-party application development. So your app basically sit inside your space, and this space will be inside your PaaS environment, and your PaaS software, it can be Cloud Foundry or Kyma, will be managing the application and its life cycle. And when we talk about Cloud Foundry, each sub account has one-to-one relationship with your org name. The Cloud Foundry basically use the term org and space, and it doesn't use the term sub account. It basically use the term org to signify a sub account. And also a sub account is fixed for a specific region. So from the API endpoint, you can see here CF EU10, and it is basically standing for Europe. And we also discussed that a sub account is basically fixed to a specific region. So it can be that Europe East is the region, and there Europe East, I'm using the AWS. So that is the region where all my sub accounts resources are put, and that is fixed for one sub account, one region. Okay, so with this section, I hope that you got a basic understanding of navigating the SAP BTP cockpit screen and what are the different features, or get a basic idea about how it is laid out, what is the structure of SAP BTP, and what are the different accounts and how they are arranged, and what are the different terminologies. Now with this, we come to the end of the structuring part. I hope that now you can navigate the SAP BTP cockpit, have a basic good understanding of what is a sub account, a space, and global account, because in the next hands-on sections, we will be encountering those terms again. So let's catch up in the next section where we will start installing the Cloud Foundry CLI in our local machine. Hello and welcome back. In this section, we are going to install the Cloud Foundry CLI, and the Cloud Foundry CLI details you can get from multiple places, but the place which you should look is Cloud Foundry GitHub account. Inside Cloud Foundry, you need to also see the CLI repository. So the CLI repository will have this wiki where you will get the most updated information about which is the Cloud Foundry version which is actively being used, and download that. Now you can see here they also provide the packaged and zipped files for version 6 and version 7. I'm going to stick with the version 6 for now, and I can download this MS OS X 64-bit. If you are using it in a Windows machine, then you can download the Windows zip file and unzip it and use it. Now if you are in Linux, then you can go for this tgz file. Now if you scroll down, you can see multiple other repository and files. Now to know more, we will actually click here in the version 6 CLI installation guide, and the version 7 now is in beta, so we'll not be actually using the version 7. Now by the time you're watching this video, it can happen that the version 7 is getting utilized. So you can also look into the version which is active at that particular moment when you are watching this video, and accordingly follow the steps. The steps are pretty simple. Now coming to the steps here, you can see here that there are some links also provided. Now if you don't want to have either the installer or compressed binaries, so this is the most easiest and the convenient way for you if you are not used to terminal programming or you want to keep a copy of the packages. Now in this particular page, you can see more details about the installation of version 6 CLI. And if you scroll down, you also have the installer and the compressed binary link. You have the package file, which I will download. I can just click here and the package file will get downloaded. I have already downloaded this before, CF-CLI installer, so I will not be again redoing that. Now, if you are in Windows or Linux machine, you can download the appropriate installer, and here you can see zip. You can just unzip that and use that particular installer. Now, if you are in Linux or Mac machine and you want to use the brew installer or you want to use the sudo apt-get installer, then those options are also provided. You have to just follow these commands and installation will be done on your terminal. Now, I'm going to stick with the package based installation. And if you download this is the package what I got. So I'm just going to double click this, and by following the guided process here, so I just have to press continue, and it will install all the libraries in the default location. Let's hit install, and it is asking me my admin password, and it is going to install the items. And the similar experience you will also find in Windows installer once you unzip this file. Now installation is done. Now let's go to the terminal. Now if you are in Windows machine, you can again relaunch the terminal just to see if you are able to follow along with the Cloud Foundry CLI command. So in this section, we are going to follow these steps what we have written down. Here the direct link also is there if you don't want to really go from the GitHub Cloud Foundry page to the CLI repository. So we also have a direct link. So I'm going to add this notes so you can also follow the link from this document here. Now coming to the CLI commands here, so let me check what is the version we have. So I can write cf version to see what is the version of my CLI. You are seeing here an error because there are certain files to which I need the root permission to be able to read or write. Now if I run this command with sudo, then it will basically ask me for my root password, and then it will allow me to run that particular command. Now one of the work around here is to make my user come into the root user group, but I'm not going to do that because then a lot of other places my permission will be changed. So if you are not able to access the cf command within your computer without sudo, then you can use the sudo. If you're able to access, then you can just skip the sudo part and use the remaining command. So for me, I'm going to stick with the sudo for each of this command. Okay, so with this command, what we are seeing here is the version of the Cloud Foundry CLI, which is 6.53, and these are sub versioning. Now the next thing which we have to do is logging into our Cloud Foundry. So what we need to log in, we need the API endpoint. We need to know what is the org we need to log in and what is the space in which we need to log in. So let me come to my terminal and just use sudo cf login. And I can also have those information provided to me within this command. So I can say -a, and I can say what is my API endpoint. So I just kind of copied this and sudo cf login -a, and take this particular command, and let me basically create a new file. So I can just make this command sudo cf login -a, and this is the API access, because sometime you have the enter or the new line character, and it basically will be triggering the end of the command. So I'm just creating that command within my Node Sublime text first before I actually put it in my terminal. Then the next thing is the org, and I can use the -o flag to mention my org, and this is my org name. Then I have my space -s, and I can say dev is my space. And then I can also have my username, which will be my email ID. So some part will be blurred here, and this will be my username. So I'm going to just put it here. And the password, I can put it also here with a -p flag, but it is better if I don't show my password and store it in a file. I will just enter the password whenever it is trying to log in and ask me that in my CLI. So let me put it here, and I've already provided all the information. It will ask me my password. Let me provide my SAP BTP cockpit password, and I am inside my dev space. So you can see that the API endpoint, user, org, and dev is all set, and I'm ready to go and execute the commands or do some kind of operation on apps, create new service. So all those operations I can perform once I log in. So if you want to learn these commands in a very detailed way, see all the information about the flag, this is the location where you should also look, clicloudfoundry.org enus version 6. And here you can see all the list of the command. So let me go to this login one, and you can see all the flags which are possible, and you can see that they are optional. You can just write cf login, and it will ask you one by one API, URL, username, password, org, space. You can also use SSO to log in as well. Now, all the options and flag are also explained below here. So if you want to know more, then you can also read this. Now, once you are logged in into account, what are the other commands which we can use? So let me clear this, and what I can do here is, let me first check the marketplace. Now CF marketplace is going to provide me list of all the service which I can create instance of, or I can subscribe to those service to use that. So if I run sudo cf marketplace, then this is going to take some time. So let me just increase the size here so that I can see the description when they get printed in details. So you will see that this CF sudo marketplace takes some time because it's going to acquire all the information about all the services and show you in your CLI. And all the information are here. Let me make it a little bigger, and you see the service description, then plan, and then broker. Now let me decrease the size of the terminal and basically stretch it out so the arrangement is proper. So you can see here the service, plans, and the description. So you have SAP HANA database, the plans are HDI shared, SBSS, Kyma, secure store. So these are similar to what we saw from the graphical user interface in SAP BTP screen as well earlier when we went to the service marketplace tab. So that is what you are also seeing here. And over the period of this section, we will be creating some of the service via CLI. Now the CLI is very powerful because then you don't have to really go into the account. By just using the terminal window, you can create service instance, you can bind your application to service instance, you can delete service instance. So all that you can also perform or carry out. Now the next important command which we'll see is CF Buildpack. Now CF Buildpack is basically a command which will show you what kind of programming languages a application can have if you want to put that application in your Cloud Foundry. So if I go and use sudo cf buildpacks, then it will show me all the build pack which I can use. So let me increase the size here. So these are all the build pack which my application can have. And if I'm using Java language, then I can create an application with the Java, and I can put that application in my Cloud Foundry, and the Cloud Foundry will be able to understand. And we can have Go, Python, PHP, R, and Ruby Rails, and multiple other language build pack as well. Now you can also create your own language build pack and put it in the Cloud Foundry if you want the Cloud Foundry to host application of that language. So whenever we put the application to the Cloud Foundry basically creates a environment, and that is the environment where our application will be running. And the environment can be out of any of this build pack. And that is what this build pack represent. So over time, we will see more about the build packs as well. Now, the next thing is CF app. Now, CF app basically lists all the apps inside your space. If you remember, when we logged into the account, we basically logged in inside our sub account and inside our space. And space is the location where our apps are hosted. So we can use sudo cf apps to get the list of all the apps which are currently present and what is the status. Are they running? Are they stopped? And get an overview of the disk usage and the URL. Sometimes the apps might have URL, sometimes they don't have, sometimes they have more than one URL. So all that information summary, you get it here. Now the next important command is to start and stop an application. Now let me try to start this Node.js application. This is currently in the stopped state. I can use here start, stop, or reset, or start, stop, or restart. And any of these commands I can use to start or stop or restart respectively, and the app name. So let me use sudo cf and start, and I can use this particular app name. And when I use the app name, then within a moment, it is going to start this application. So if I try to reach this URL, you will not see anything now. Let me just check. And if the app starts, now the app is started. So let's check, and the app was started. So I was able to see this particular demo sales lead application. Now this is the very basic sales lead application which we have created for specifically this course. So here I have the list of all the leads, and I can filter those lead based on name. So I can just enter the name and press enter, and I can also have address. So if I say maybe Kentucky, or just say Kentucky, then that particular location or the address whichever lead have will be filtered. So this is a simple sales lead application which we have created, and here from the terminal that application was stopped state. I have started that, so we are able to see that particular application. Now I can also stop that application. So let me do sudo cf stop, and the application name is what we have, Node.js app 01. So that is the name of the application, and stop it. So the app is stopped and I got this OK printed. And if I try to reach this particular URL, let me try to refresh this page, and you will see that there is a 4004 error because the app is stopped. So if I try to again see the status, sudo cf apps to see the list of all the app status, then it's again stopped. Now if I want to restart it, I can just use sudo cf restart and the app, and you can see that the app is restarted. So let me go here and again refresh, and you can see that the app is working. Now once the app is restarted, if I want to see the information of all the app, I can again say sudo cf apps, and you will see that the last app is started. So this is a quick way to start, stop and restart your application which are hosted in your space. Now coming to the next command, so the logs. And this is one of the very important command, because most of the time when you deploy app or you are developing the application, it will not work out of the box, or there might be some issues. So first thing which as a developer you go and to see what has happened. So if I want to check the log of the node app, so I can just use sudo cf app name. So I can just take the app name here, Node.js app 01, and let me write logs. And according to the documentation, we have cf app name logs, but it should be cf logs and then the app name. So let's check this command, sudo cf logs, and then I can have this app name. So let's see now. And getting the log takes certain bit of time, because it's going to retrieve all the logs from the beginning till the current time. So the operation sometimes takes more time. Now this particular command is been waiting for past 10 minutes because the logs are generated from past 1 month. So there are a lot of logs which it tries to get and show you. So the waiting time is also very large. Now I'm stopping this command because it is already waited for more than 10 minutes and it is not practical to wait so long to get the logs. Now one of the way to see the log is to add the -- recent flag here, because if you use the recent flag, then only the recent logs will be shown. So let me give my sudo password, and it will retrieve the recent logs, and you can see that even the recent logs are also long, so you can find it out what has happened. And these are timestamp based, so you can also see the logs which are here. They are for 20th 6th 1953, and if you scroll down to the last one, it is 06/20/1956. So within 3 minutes, so much of logs have been created. And all the recent process of starting the container and stopping that container, and these are the SSL keys. And why these SSL keys are getting printed, because when I try to connect to my PostgreSQL SQL database, then I use this particular credential, and I also console logged just at the process of testing. So in the production, the console log should be removed, but I put the console log just to see if I'm able to acquire the right configurations from my service binding. So more about that we will cover in the later sections. Now these are all the logs, and by using the logs you can print console statement of your application, which you can monitor and see what is going wrong if you are not getting your desired output. Okay, so I will add this -recent flag, so you don't have to wait for long if the app already have a lot of generated logs. And the next command is to check the health of a specific app. So if I clear this and say sudo cf apps, and it's going to give a overview about all the apps within that particular space where we logged in. Now, if I want to know more about this particular app, the last one, then I can just say sudo cf app and app name. So it will give me more detailed information about that particular application. Now I can also see here when it was uploaded, 3rd June, and the build pack of that particular application and what is the underlying stack, Linux stack it is using, also the type, which is web and instance. Now you can also see here the CPU utilization of this app and the disk and the memory utilization. So it is allocated 128 megabyte of memory, out of which it has only used 45 megabyte of memory, and disk, it has been provided 1 GB of disk and it has only used 89.6 MB of the disk. Now, if you have an application with Cloud Foundry and suddenly the usage spiked of that application, and the application, when the usage are spiked, then it started behaving slow. So what you can do is you can also scale that particular application. So what you can do is you can create 2 applications, and that way half the user can use one app and the other half can use the other app. Or you can increase the memory and the disk size. So those are 2 ways of scaling. So the way to increase the memory and the disk space is called vertical scaling, and the way to create multiple applications out of the same app configuration are called horizontal scaling. So let's try to see how can we do both. So if I want to create multiple instances, so what I can do is I can just take this application, and if I want to create multiple instances of the same application, so I can just use the command sudo cf app and app name -i for number of instance, and let me try to make 2 instances of the same application. Now it's throwing us an error because the command here need to be scale, not app. So let me just update here as well, scale and scale and scale. So what I'm going to do now is just replace this app with scale. So when I say scale, app name -i for number of instance. So horizontal scaling, first I'm trying to do, creating multiple instances of the same application, and it has already done that. So how fast it was. So let me see how many apps I have, sudo cf apps. And you can see here that the instance are 2 for the same application. So if I try to reach this application, let me go in the browser and try to reach the application. And the application is performing as it was. And if I try to see the logs or maybe more description about it, so sudo cf, let me bring this little up so you can see also sudo cf app and the app name here. So if I try to just see more detail about it, just to get the details of the usage, then you can see that there are 2 apps running. Now the first CPU utilization is 0.7, the other is 0.5. They both have 128 megabyte of memory, and the disk utilization is almost similar for both of the app. Now here you can see that instance have 2/2. That means you can only create at max 2 instances for this application. If you have more quotas or entitlements, then you can also create multiple instances of that same application to share the load. And these are all internally handled, how the route is happening, to which application the traffic is directed. So all that is internally managed by the Cloud Foundry. So this is how easy for you to scale an application, which if it reaches its peak load, if the scenario happens that the application is reaching a peak load. The second way is the vertical scaling, where I can increase the RAM, the disk space assigned to the application. So I can also do that. So let me clear everything. And what I can do here, I can just use sudo scale, and here I can use -m for memory. So I can just say the app name, which is this Node.js app 01 app name, and I can here say -m for the memory, and the previous memory which it has is 128 megabyte. I can make it 512 megabyte and or maybe 256 megabyte. So just reducing the footprint because I have a lot of other apps working, so my quota might be limited. So let's try to see if it works. And here we have missed the cf command. So just before the scale cf, and it will ask if you want to restart the app, and you say yes, and within a moment it will restart the app with the new configuration. So we have two instances, and both of the instances will have the new memory. So app started, and these are the state now. And what you can see here is the memory is still 128. Let me try to provide 512 and see if there are changes. And it is starting the application. In a moment we'll come to know the status. And you can see that in the previous case, it basically was not able to provide us the 256 megabyte. But in this case, you can see that the 512 megabyte is provided to the first application which was running, and the second application, the second instance, have the 128 megabyte block of the memory. So this is how you can increase the memory size of the application, and this is required when you have some memory intensive application or a lot of users are using the application to process the request of those which required more RAM. Now a similar command is also to change the disk space. Now let me try to reduce the disk space, because both are possible. So you can either scale up or scale down. So I can use sudo cf and I can say scale and the app name, and then I can say -k, and from 1 GB I want to go to 512 megabytes. So I want to scale down from the hardware and say yes. So the disk space I want to reduce, and let's see what happens. So the app restarted. Now one thing we can see here, the memory is actually increased 512 for both the application. Let me try to also just check the sudo cf apps and this particular app information if I want to see. So just to check what we have, so cf app and the app name, and by checking again the status, you can see that the updated status is proper. Here in the status we were not getting the updated information, and that is the same reason why when the status updated, when we increased the RAM size, it actually showed us in the second time that the memory has been updated for both the app. Because when you scale, the scale happens for both the instance. So the increase of the RAM happened here, and here the decrease of the disk space also happened for both the instance of the application. And you can also just check the status again just to verify that whatever the scale up or the scale down operation you are carrying out has been performed. Okay, so this was the basic app scale up and scale down commands. Now there's one last command which you need to know, which is to delete an application. So this is something which need to be handled with care. So if I try to delete this particular application, so I can just use sudo cf delete and your app name, and sometime when app is running it will not automatically delete. So you can also add this -f force flag just to force the deletion, and within a moment it will be deleted. So let me check the logs, cf sudo app node.js app01. So just see if this app exists, and there's no app with this name. That means the app is deleted. So I can also check this with sudo cf apps, just list of all apps, and you can see that I just have now 2 applications and our node.js app01 is deleted. Okay, so this is the basic CLI command related to your build pack, your marketplace, your apps, and the logs, scale up and scale down. So I hope that you got a basic hold on what we can do with our Cloud Foundry CLI and how quick it was to get things done. So therefore you will see that the Cloud Foundry CLI is also very popular among developer while they develop, because you can do a lot of operation very quickly with the CLI and automate also multiple operation. Now you can also know more by going into the CLI cloudfoundry.org ENUS version 6. You can see a lot of other commands also possible with the Cloud Foundry CLI, which you might be using on daily basis if you are working as a developer or as administrator with Cloud Foundry. Now there's also a simple command here. You can just use sudo cf help to see the list of all the command. It also arranges multiple commands into groups to see what are all the commands which are possible, and you can know more about those commands by just having the help sudo cf app and -h, or you can just write --help, and it will basically tell you more information about that particular command. Okay, so these are 2 ways to know about multiple other commands which you have not used before or you want to know more about. So this is about the basic Cloud Foundry CLI. Now what we will do is we have one application in our GitHub, And this is exactly the same application, but this time this application is just having a file from which the data is read. So this is sample data.json, and this Node.js application is just reading data from this sample data.json file instead of getting the data from the database. So this is the first application, or this is the starting point of the application. So we will pull this application from GitHub and we will be pushing it to the Cloud Foundry. And here I'm not covering the details about development because this is not a Node.js or a front-end development course where you will be learning about how to use technology and create this particular application. Our objective is mostly on the DevOps and working with the Cloud Foundry or working with the SAP BTP when you work as a developer, because there can be multiple other technologies also by which you can create the same application or implement the same feature. You can get this application for free in my GitHub account, Ajay Tech, and demo sales lead info application. Now let's catch up in the next section to pull this application and push it to the Cloud Foundry, and we'll also show you the manifest.yaml details, so you also get information about why that is getting utilized. Okay, so we are in our terminal and we will be pulling this application. So I can just copy the HTTPS link and I can say git clone and this particular link. Now I already have my git installed in my terminal, so I will be able to execute this command. So let's see what we have. So if I do ls, then I have this demo sales lead info application. So let me go inside this folder and I can see that I have readme file, app, images, package, and all the artifacts I have. Now let me open my VS Code. I can just use my code command to open the VS Code with this directory opened, and you can just drag your folder in where the application got downloaded into your VS Code, and here you can see that the application. Now this Node.js application will have some start script. So whenever we try to start this application, it is going to run this start command, which is just loading the app.js file. And within this app.js file, I have just written a simple express-based application, and this express-based application is just hosting a simple EJS UI. Now I have selected the EJS because that is the most simplest thing which I can find to create a basic UI which is dynamic. And what this EJS website does, let me try to install the dependency pretty quickly. If I try to go into terminal and just say npm install, so if I want to run this app locally, so I need to install the dependency. And once the dependency are installed, I can say npm start and it will run the start script. So this application started on 8080 port, and if I try to open localhost 8080, then you can see this simple application. The front end is having just a title, a search, and some list, and I can filter this list with the name and also with the address what we just tested. And this is the first application which I want to push to my Cloud Foundry, and it is functioning properly in my local environment as well. So let me stop this server, and what I can do now to push this application to my Cloud Foundry. Now you don't need necessarily this application to be run in your local environment before you push. I just want to show that this application works also in the local environment. So if you are downloading this application, you can just download and push it also to your Cloud Foundry. That will also work. So let me try to see what are the new files I have. I have this node modules file which was previously not present, which was added once I try to download the dependency. So let me also remove this Node.js rm-r node modules. So let me try to see what are the files, ls-l. So the node modules are removed. So this is equivalent to the application which I just cloned from the Git. No node modules are now present in my application folder. Okay, so to push this application, I just have to use sudo cf push. That's all. And you can give an app name if you want, but by just using the sudo cf push, it will try to push the application into your respective space. And let me try to push this application. So what I can say is sudo cf push, and I will be providing the name of the application, maybe say my node app and 01, and this is the name of my application, and let's try to push this application. So by just using the cf push app name, you will be able to push the application, and it will automatically get to know what is the build pack required to run this application. And once it figures out what kind of application this is, then accordingly it will set the environment, and once the environment are set up, it will upload your application to the droplet, and it is basically creating a cell, and within the cell you will have a virtual environment, and you can see that the app is started. You also have a route assigned to the application, and let me try to reach this application. So if I try to open this app, and you will see that the app is running in my Cloud Foundry now, and I can just use this filter and it's all working properly. So this is the way you can push application into Cloud Foundry.